Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It's a pretty rainy, gray day here in New York City, and I've just been I got groceries today. I've just been laying around, barely doing anything. So I'm trying to force myself to do something, and I thought could read a book, and then I thought I could read it out loud and really try to comprehend it. Um, I'm gonna read from this book. It's called Meeting the Universe Halfway: Quantum Physics and the Entanglement of Matter and Meaning by Karen Barad. And I think I might have read the intro on this channel before, but I kind of just want to go to a random chapter and read it for this video and just see if I can understand it. Maybe I could read basically the book is kind of about how we make meaning in science and the observer and the observed, I think, and how you can't ever really see something from the outside because it's always in relation, and that relation is what maybe co-creates the subjects in relation. That's just me riffing, but I have some coffee here. I have some seltzer here. I have my glasses on. So let me put the video of myself near the camera so it looks like I'm looking at you more. Is that better? That's a little bit better. So, I'm just gonna read from this book and see what happens and see how far I go. Yeah, right? Why not? So, chapter 4 is called Agential Realism: How Material Discursive Practices Matter. And there's a quote by Steve Shaviro. And it says, "Where did we ever get the strange idea that nature, as opposed to culture, is ahistorical and timeless? We are far too impressed by our own cleverness and self-consciousness. We need to stop telling ourselves the same old anthropocentric bedtime stories." That's kind of a basic quote, but it's just saying that why do we think that nature is timeless? Okay, and all the stories we tell ourselves have us in the center, us being human beings, whatever that means. All right, now Karen writes, language has been granted too much power. The linguistic turn, the semiotic turn, the interpretative turn, the cultural turn. It seems that at every turn lately, everything, even materiality, is turned into a matter of language or some other form of cultural representation. The ubiquitous puns on matter do not, alas, mark a rethinking of the key concepts, materiality and signification, and the relationship between them. Rather, they seem to be symptomatic of the extent to which matters of fact, so to speak, have been replaced with matters of signification. Language matters, discourse matters, culture matters. There is an important sense in which the only thing that doesn't seem to matter anymore is matter. Like matter itself. Physical things. Language has been granted too much power. Matter has been given... language has been given too much power, period. Taking matter seriously, materiality and performativity. What compels the belief that we have a direct access to cultural representations and their content that we lack toward the things represented? How did language come to be more trustworthy than matter? Why are language and culture granted their own agency and historicity, while matter is figured as passive and immutable, or at best inherits a potential for change derivatively from language and culture? How does one even go about inquiring after the material conditions that have led us to such a brute reversal of naturalist beliefs when materiality itself is always already figured within a linguistic domain as its condition of possibility? Okay, to me, I'm hearing from that, like with video, right, or with pictures, those are forms of language, like text is, and somehow like what's represented, what it becomes described, like the description of something becomes more important than the thing itself, so that we believe that we don't have direct access to what compels the belief that we have direct access to cultural representations and their content that we lack toward the things represented? That's an interesting question. It is hard to deny that the power of language has been substantial. One might argue that it has been too substantial, or perhaps more to the point, too substantializing. Meaning, like, matter arranges itself in order to be represented. Neither an exaggerated faith in the power of language nor the expressed apprehension that language is being granted too much power is a novel feature of the late 20th century and early 21st. This is a common thing people think about, she's saying. For example, during the 19th century, Nietzsche warned against the mistaken tendency to take grammar too seriously, allowing linguistic structure to shape or determine our understanding of the world, believing that the subject and predicate structure of language reflects a prior ontological reality of substance and attribute. The belief that grammatical categories reflect the underlying structure of the world is a continuing seductive habit of mind worth questioning. That's really easy to understand. That means basically that the way language is structured structures our understanding of the reality we're experiencing, right? So that we start arranging the world around the structure inherent to our language, that being like subject and object relationships, subject and predicate, things like that, like grammar, even like pronouns, right? That create a certain set of realities to exist in, not thinking that there are other ones outside of that, right? That language is like all determining or something, and we have to, that's like obviously, that's pretty obvious to me so far. It is not, after all, the common sense view of representationalism, the belief that representations serve a mediating function between knower and known, that displays a deep mistrust of matter, holding it off at a distance, figuring it as passive, immutable, and mute, in need of the mark of an external force like culture or history to complete it. Indeed, the representationalist belief in the power of words to mirror pre-existing phenomena is the metaphysical substrate that supports social constructivist as well as traditional realist beliefs, perpetuating the endless recycling of untenable options. I'm not 100% sure what social constructivist or traditional realist beliefs are. That'd be really helpful in understanding this paragraph, and I'm sure if I read maybe this part of the book, I would know. But, basically, she's saying the same thing again, that like that we believe representations serve a mediating function between knower and known, so that like basically like we know Joe Biden, we know Kamala Harris, right? But we know their representations. basically. That's an example I can think of it as. We don't know them. That they are actually passive, immutable, mute, and in needing of a mark of an external force like culture or history to complete them. A performative understanding of discursive practices challenges the representationalist belief in the power of words to represent pre-existing things. Okay, so a performative understanding of discursive practices. Discursive practices meaning having conversations with words. Performativity, properly construed, is not an invitation to turn everything into words. On the contrary, performativity is precisely a contestation of the excessive power granted to language to determine what is real. Boom. Hence, the ironic contrast to the misconception that would equate performativity with a form of linguistic monism that takes language to be the stuff of reality. Performativity is properly understood as a contestation of the unexamined habits of mind that grant language and other forms of representation more power in determining our ontologies than they deserve. Okay, I think I understand this paragraph. This just basically means, like my last video, you should go watch it. It's about performativity and what is performativity. So that's why I chose to read this chapter, because it had to do with performativity, or at least this beginning of the chapter. And it's just saying, like, what is a performative? A performative is words that do things. Really... Oh, are we frozen? Are we frozen? We're here? I'm going to pause and start. Okay, we're recording again. A really clear example of something performative is saying, like, I do in a marriage ceremony. Those words are binding. Saying those words isn't just saying I do, it's actually doing something bigger than that, which is completing a marriage. And it relies on your intention and the social context in which you say something. So, like, if me saying I do right now, it's not exactly what we'd call performative, but saying it in a marriage ceremony would be. Do you kind of get what I mean by what performative is? Like, words that do things. So she's just saying that we've given words too much power to do certain things, because we're taking language as the stuff of reality when it's in actuality not exactly that. And if we have unexamined like habits of the mind, we may grant certain language more power in determining our being, basically. That's what ontology means, than like those words deserve to do. Deserve. That's judgmental. Okay, cool. Let's continue. Oh, that was it. That was... Those 4 paragraphs was one heading, and now there's a new heading. It's called Humanist Orbits, and it is much longer. A lot of this book is about Niels Bohr, and I think Bohr created the representation of the atom, maybe? Oh my god. Let me ask Alexa. Computer, what did Bohr do? No, computer. Who is Niels Bohr?
According to Wikipedia, Niels Henrik David Bohr was a Danish physicist who made foundational contributions to understanding atomic structure and quantum theory, for which he received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1922. Bohr was also a philosopher and a promoter of scientific research.
Okay, yeah, he has to do with, like, the atom. Anyway, let's just keep going. Maybe... how far are we? We're 15 minutes in. Okay. Humanist orbits. Gazing out into the night sky, or deep down into the structure of matter with a telescope or microscope in hand, man reconfirms his ability to negotiate immense differences in scale in the blink of an eye. The blink of an eye. Designed specifically for our visual apparatus, telescopes and microscopes are the stuff of mirrors, reflecting what is out there. Nothing is too vast or too minute. Though a mere speck, a blip on the radar screen of all that is, man is the center around which the world turns. Man is the sun, the nucleus, the fulcrum, the unifying force, the glue that holds it all together. Man is an individual apart from all the rest, and it is this very distinction that bestows on him the inheritance of distance, a place from which to reflect on the world, his fellow man, and himself. A distinct individual, the unit of all measure, finitude made flesh, his separateness is the key. That's a crazy paragraph where the word man is used over and over again to make a point, I think, about patriarchy. And that's almost like a poem. That was great. Representationalism, metaphysical individualism, and humanism work hand in hand, holding this worldview in place. These forces have such a powerful grip on contemporary patterns of thought that even some of the most concerted efforts to escape the grasp of these anthropocentric forces have failed. Niels Bohr's philosophy physics poses an energetic challenge not only to Newtonian physics and metaphysics, but to representationalism and concordant epistemologies, such as conventional forms of realism and social constructivism as well. It's like there are all these labels for different kinds of ways people think about things. Post-structuralist theorists such as Michel Foucault and Judith Butler blast the tenets of humanism and representationalism in an attempt to harness the force of this explosion to garner sufficient momentum against the threshold escape velocity. Oh, that's so nice to say about them. Each of these powerful attempts rockets our cultural imaginary out of a well-worn, stable orbit. But ultimately, the power of these vigorous interventions is insufficient to fully extricate these theories from the seductive nucleus that binds them, and it becomes clear that each has once again been caught in some other orbit around the same nucleus. It's like queer escape. Always, it's like everything still comes back to the center somehow. Okay. Suitably energetic to cause significant perturbations, nonetheless, the prized ionization is thwarted in each case by anthropocentric remainders. What is needed is a rigorous, simultaneous challenge to all components of this gripping long-range force. These forces being representationalism, metaphysical individualism, and humanism. Keeping in, like, the worldview of man's separateness. Okay. In this chapter, I propose a post-humanist performative approach to understanding technoscientific and other natural cultural practices that specifically acknowledges and takes account of matter's dynamism. Matter's dynamism. Okay, go on, Karen. The move toward performative alternatives to representationalism shifts the focus from questions of correspondence between descriptions and reality. Do they mirror nature or culture? To matters of practices, doings, and actions. Okay, the move towards performative alternatives. We're talking about performative alternatives to representationalism. Representationalism meaning we need to look up representationalism, I think, just for the sake of, let's see, sorry, my mic's in the way. Okay, it just means that it just says the practice or advocacy of representational art Okay, the philosophy is the doctrine that thought is a manipulation of mental representations that somehow correspond to external states or objects. Okay, cool. Representationalism, that our thoughts and words correspond to things in reality. Performative alternatives to representationalism will shift the focus from questions of correspondence between description and reality to matters of practices, doings, and actions. Such an approach, that means that actions, doings, practices, they are as powerful as words, or more powerful. Let's see. Such an approach also brings to the forefront important questions of ontology, materiality, and agency, while social constructivist and traditional realist approaches get caught up in the geometrical optics of reflection, where, much like the infinite play of images between two facing mirrors, the epistemological gets bounced back and forth, but nothing more is seen. Ooh, this part I think is important. Okay. So basically, this is like performance versus traditional art. We could look at a painting and we could like talk about what it's showing us, and try to understand it. Like epistemology just means knowledge, and or no, like, yeah, that's all it means. And I'm gonna read the sentence again. Moving away from the representationist trap of geometrical optics, I shift the focus to physical optics, to questions of diffraction rather than reflection. Oh wait, that's a sentence ahead. The infinite play of images between... It's like the art world is the infinite play of images between two facing mirrors. The knowledge gets bounced back and forth, but nothing more is seen. Such an approach also brings... Like, what is social constructivist and traditional realist? Social constructivism is a sociological theory of knowledge according to which human development is socially situated and knowledge is constructed through interaction with others. Social constructivism is a variety of cognitive constructionism that emphasizes the collaborative nature of learning. Okay. It's a theory of knowledge according to which human development is socially situated and knowledge is constructed through interaction with others. Okay. She's saying that the social constructivist places the human as the agent, at the center, as the main character. So that when the human interacts with something, it's simply that, the human interacting with that thing. And that is social constructivism. It's saying that, basically that the human is the one interacting with culture and with the outside. That to Karen is too anthropocentric. She wants to shift away from the optics of everything and kind of talk about something deeper, like what moves everything to do what it does. Okay. Diffractively reading the insights of post-structuralist theory, science studies, and physics through one another entails thinking the cultural and the natural together in illuminating ways. What often appears as separate entities with sharp edges does not actually entail a relation of absolute exteriority at all. Like the diffraction patterns illuminating the indefinite nature of boundaries, displaying shadows in light regions and bright spots in dark regions, the relationship of the cultural and the natural is a relation of exteriority within, in quotes, exteriority within. This is not a static relationality, but a doing the enactment of boundaries that always entails constitutive exclusions and therefore requisite questions of accountability. This part's losing me. One of my aims is to contribute to efforts to sharpen the theoretical tool of performativity for science studies and feminist theory endeavors alike, and to promote their mutual consideration. Crucially, an agential, realist elaboration of performativity allows matter its due as an active participant in the world's becoming, in its ongoing intra-activity, and furthermore, it provides an understanding of how discursive practices matter. Okay. She basically, I think in the beginning, which I might have made a video about it before if you want to check in my earlier videos, like, there's interaction and then there's intra-action. And intra-action assumes both participants in the exchange to be active, basically, to be acting. So, like, I'm picking up this cup. I'm the actor interacting with this cup, but if you just pause to think about the cup is interacting with me, what if we gave agency to this cup, basically? And I know it sounds, there's a lot of ways that it sounds, but I think she's on to something here. Let's keep reading. Refusing the anthropocentrisms of humanism and anti-humanism, post-humanism marks the practice of accounting for the boundary-making practices by which the human and its others are differentially delineated and defined. In invoking this contested term, I want to be clear that I'm not interested in postmodernist celebrations or demonizations of the post-human as living testimonies to the death of the human, nor as the next stage of man. Wait. I want to make it clear that I'm not interested in a celebration or a demonization of the post-human as living testimonies to the death of the human. Saying, like, humans don't matter. They could just die. If humans are, if everything's intraactive and a cup is as important as a human, then humans should just die. That's not what she means. And then, or as a next stage of man. On the other hand, it would be like, oh, knowing interaction exists is the next stage of mankind's, flourishing with tools and knowledge. It's not about mankind. No critical embrace of the cyborg as the ironic liberatory savior is at issue here. Posthumanism, as I intend it here, is not calibrated to the human. On the contrary, it is about taking issue with human exceptionalism while being accountable for the role we play in the differential constitution and differential positioning of the human among other creatures. Spot on. Posthumanism does not attribute the source of all change to culture, denying nature any sense of agency or historicity. In fact, it refuses the idea of a natural or even purely cultural division between nature and culture, calling for an accounting of how this boundary is actively configured and reconfigured. Posthuman does not presume that man is the measure of all things. It is not held captive to the distance scale of the human, but rather is attentive to the practices by which scale is produced. Posthumanism has no patience for principled claims presuming the banishment or death of metaphysics, especially when such haughty assertions turn out to be decoys for the covert resurrection of man as the unspoken measure of what is and isn't observable or intelligible. It doesn't abide by prohibitations against talk of ontology, restricting all deliberation to the epistemological. Posthumanism eschews both humanist and structuralist accounts of the subject that position the human as either pure cause or pure effect, and the body is a natural and fixed dividing line between interiority and exteriority. Posthumanism doesn't presume the separateness of anything, let alone the alleged spatial, ontological, and epistemological distinction that sets humans apart. Okay, what's she saying there? She's just saying what posthumanism is or isn't, basically, to her, and defining it against these other forms of thought which center the human more or take posthumanism in directions that bring it back to the human. She wants to be very clear that posthumanism is a complete decentering of the human. It's not for or against humankind. It is a theory of things and agency. In fact, the agential realist ontology that I propose does not take separateness to be an inherent feature of how the world is, but neither does it denigrate separateness as mere illusion, as artifact of human consciousness led astray. Difference cannot be taken for granted. It matters. Indeed, it is what matters. The world is not populated with things that are more or less the same or different from one another. Relations do not follow relata, but the other way around. Matter is neither fixed and given, nor the mere end result of different processes. Matter is produced and productive, generated and generative. Matter is agentive, not a fixed essence or property of things. Mattering is differentiating, and what differences come to matter in the iterative production of different differences. She said that. Matter is agentive. Matter has agency. Not a fixed essence or property of things. Matter is not a fixed essence or property of things. Matter is differentiating, and which differences come to matter. Matter is differentiating matter in the iterative production of whatever. Changing patterns of difference are neither pure cause nor pure effect. Indeed, they are that which affects, or rather enacts, a causal structure, differentiating cause and effect. Difference patterns do not merely change in time and space. Space-time is an enactment of differentness, a way of marking here and now. Changing patterns of difference are neither pure cause nor pure effect. They are that which affects, or rather enacts, a causal structure, differentiating cause from effect. Difference patterns do not merely change in time and space. Space-time is an enactment of differentness, a way of marking here and now. Okay, I like that. Grand kind of gestural sentences. Now we're into a new section. I feel like I could keep going. Go ahead and pause here and get a glass of water, take your sleeping pill if you're trying to fall asleep, or maybe put your phone down, charge it, put it on Do Not Disturb, turn it face down. Now's a good time to do that. Okay. The next part is called an agential realist ontology. Ontology means being. Reality is bigger than us. Ian Hacking. I think the world is precisely what gets lost in doctrines of representation and scientific objectivity. Donna Haraway. Oh, I love that. I agree with Donna here. She says that she thinks the world is precisely what gets lost in doctrines of representation and scientific objectivity. The world is what isn't represented. Representationalism takes the notion of separation as foundational. It separates the world into ontologically disjunct domains of words and things, leaving itself with the dilemma of their linkage such that knowledge is possible. Words are things, right? So you can't see words are things. If words are untethered from the material world, how do representations gain a foothold? If we no longer believe that the world is teeming with inherent resemblances whose signatures are inscribed on the face of the world, things already emblazoned with signs, words lying in wait like so many pebbles of sand on a beach there to be discovered, but rather that the knowing subject is enmeshed in a thick web of representations, such that the mind cannot see its way to objects that are now forever out of reach, and all that is visible is the sticky problem of humanity's own captivity within language. Then it becomes apparent that representationalism is a prisoner of the problematic metaphysics it postulates. Like the frustrated would-be runner in Zeno's paradox. Computer, what is Zeno's paradox?
According to Wikipedia, Zeno's paradoxes are a set of philosophical problems generally thought to have been devised by Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea to support Parmenides' doctrine that contrary to the evidence of one's senses, the belief in plurality and change is mistaken, and in particular that motion is nothing but an illusion.
Okay, it's some like old Greek shit. Anyway, this paragraph did lose me a little bit. She's basically saying we can't start at representationalism. There's an inherent flaw in representationalism because it's a prisoner of the problematic metaphysics it postulates. And so it's like she said before, it's like those two mirrors staring at each other. That's kind of the problem with representationalism. It's just two mirrors facing each other. The postulation of individually determinate entities with inherent properties is the hallmark of atomistic metaphysics. Think Bohr. Atomism hails from Democritus. According to Democritus, the properties of all things derive from the properties of the smallest unit. Atoms, the uncuttable or inseparable. That's where the word atom comes from. Liberal social theories and scientific theories alike allow much to the idea that the world is composed of individuals with separately attributable properties. An entangled web of scientific, social, ethical, and political practices and our understanding of them hinges on the various differential instantations of this presupposition. Much hangs in the balance in contesting its seeming inevitability. Okay, I didn't get that part. Liberal social theories owe much to the idea that the world is composed of individuals, atomist view. An entangled web of everything and understanding of them will hinge on the various differential instantations of this presupposition. Much hangs in the balance. I don't know. Niels Bohr won the Nobel Prize for his quantum model of the atom, which marks the beginning of his seminal contributions to the development of the quantum theory. Crucially, however, in a stunning reversal of his intellectual forefathers' schema, Bohr rejects the atomistic metaphysics that takes things as ontologically basic entities. For Bohr, things do not have inherently determinate boundaries or properties, and words do not have inherently determinate meanings. Bohr also calls into question the related Cartesian belief in the inherent distinction between subject and object, and knower and known. Indeed, Bohr's philosophy physics poses a radical challenge not only to Newtonian physics, but also to Cartesian epistemology and its representationalistic triadic structure of words, knower, and things. Okay. It might be said that the epistemological framework that Bohr develops rejects both the transparency of language and the transparency of measurement. However, even more fundamentally, it rejects the presupposition that language and measurement perform mediating functions. Language does not represent states of affairs, and measurements do not represent measurement-independent states of being. Bohr develops his epistemological framework without giving in to the despair of nihilism or the dizziness of relativism. With brilliance and finesse, Bohr finds a way to hold on to the possibility of objective knowledge as the grand structures of Newtonian physics and representationalism begin to crumble. Bohr's break with Newton, Descartes, and Democritus is based not in mere idle philosophical reflection, but on new empirical findings in the domain of atomic physics that came to light during the first quarter of the 20th century. Bohr's struggle to provide a theoretical understanding of these findings resulted in his radical proposal that an entirely new epistemological framework is required. Unfortunately, Bohr does not explore the crucial ontological dimensions of his insights, but rather focuses on their epistemological import. I have mined his writings for his implicit ontological views, and here elaborate on them in the development of agential realist ontology. So Karen Barad is laying out an agential realist ontology, meaning a realist, something that has to do with realism or what's real, and the agency of what's real, and the beingness. Ontology basically means beingness, like about the being of something, whereas epistemological means about the knowing of something, and knowing and being are thought of as different things. Okay, and so Bohr in his lifetime explored a lot of what his findings meant for the knowledge framework of science. But Karen is interested in what Bohr discovered and its implications for the being nature of science. The being of science, the practice of it. In this section, I present a brief overview of important aspects of Bohr's account and move on to the explication of an agential realist ontology. This relational ontology is the basis for my post-humanist performative account of material bodies, both human and non-human. This account refuses the representationalist fixation on words and things and the problematic of the nature of their relationship, advocating instead a relationality between specific material configurings of the world through which boundaries, properties, and meanings are differently enacted, and specific material phenomena. This causal relationship between the apparatuses of bodily production and the phenomena produced is one of agential intra-action. The details follow. I don't know. I have to take a break and pause here. I might keep reading. I might not. Let me just pause and see. Okay, so I took a little break and decided to continue. I don't know if that's the right decision, but I just feel like I have a little bit more in me. And I just think the subject is interesting, and it's cool that she's giving words to a kind of new idea. According to Bohr, theoretical concepts, for example, position and momentum, are not ideational in character, but rather specific physical arrangements. For example, the notion of position cannot be presumed to be a well-defined abstract concept, nor can it be presumed to be an individually determinate attribute of independently existing objects. Rather, position has meaning only when an apparatus with an appropriate set of fixed parts is used. And furthermore, any measure of position using this apparatus cannot be attributed to some abstract, independently existing object, but rather is a property of the phenomenon, the inseparability of the object and the measuring agencies. Similarly, momentum is meaningful only as a material arrangement involving a specific set of movable parts. Hence, the indeterminacy of simultaneous position and momentum measurements is a straightforward matter of the material exclusion of position and momentum arrangements, one requiring fixed parts and the complementary arrangement requiring those same parts to be movable. She kind of lost me at the end. She's kind of saying like, oh, you can't measure position and momentum at the same time. So it kind of shows you how, I guess, relative things are to the measuring apparatus. As I argued in Chapter 3, the primal ontological unit is not independent objects with inherent boundaries and properties, but rather phenomena. In my agential realist elaboration, phenomena do not merely mark the epistemological inseparability of observer and observed, or the results of measurements. Rather, phenomena are the ontological inseparability/entanglement of interacting agencies. That is, phenomena are ontologically primitive relations without pre-existing relata. Oh my god. I didn't read Chapter 3, but that is, phenomena are ontologically primitive relations without pre-existing relata. The notion of interaction represents a profound conceptual shift. It is through specific agential interactions that the boundaries and properties of the components of phenomena become determinate, and that particular concepts, that is, particular material articulations of the world, become meaningful. It is through specific agential interactions that the boundaries and properties of the components of phenomena become determinate, and that particular concepts become meaningful. Interactions include the larger material arrangement that affects the agential cut between subject and object. That is, the agential cut enacts a resolution within the phenomenon of the inherent etymological indeterminacy. In other words, relata do not pre-exist relations. Rather, relata within phenomena emerge through specific interactions. Crucially, then, interactions enact agential separability, the condition of exteriority within phenomena. The notion of agential separability is of fundamental importance, for in the absence of a classical ontological condition of exteriority between observer and observed, it provides an alternative ontological condition for the possibility of objectivity. Moreover, the agential cut enacts a causal structure among components of a phenomena in the marking of the measuring agencies by the measured object. It is in this sense that the measurement can be said to express particular facts about which is measured. That is, the measurement is a causal interaction and not any old playing around. Hence, the notion of interaction constitutes a reworking of the traditional notion of causality. And that was hard for me. I think I'm losing it and I need to rest. But, it's like phenomena relation doesn't come after the two things being related. And it may not come before them either, but she's saying they do maybe. And so thingness, differentiation, is articulated by an agential cut, which is the marking of a phenomena, maybe? I'm not sure. The naming of one? Okay, let's just keep going, even though I don't understand. In my further elaboration of this agential realist ontology, I argue that phenomena are not the mere result of laboratory exercises engineered by human subjects. Rather, phenomena are different patterns of mattering, produced through complex agential interactions of multiple material discursive practices or apparatuses of bodily production, where apparatuses are not mere observing instruments, but boundary drawing practices. specific material reconfigurings of the world which come to matter. These causal interactions need not involve humans. Indeed, it is through such practices that the differential boundaries between humans and non-humans, culture and nature, science and the social are constituted. Okay, so the measuring tool, I feel like since I took my glasses off, I understand less. So that's okay. So the measuring tools don't just measure something objectively from the outside. They create the thing that is being measured, kind of, or they draw the line around something in order to understand it. Phenomena are constitutive of reality, are constitutive of reality. Reality is composed not of things in themselves or things behind phenomena, but things in phenomena. The world is a dynamic process of interactivity and materialization in the enactment of determinate causal structures with determinate boundaries, properties, meanings, and patterns of marks on bodies. This ongoing flow of agency through which parts of the world make itself differentially intelligible to another part of the world, and through which causal structures are stabilized and destabilized, does not take place in space and time, but happens in the making of space-time itself. It is through specific agential interactions that a differential sense of being is enacted in the ongoing ebb and flow of agency. That is, it is through specific interactions that phenomena come to matter in both senses of the word. That's kind of cool. That's spiritual. The world is an open process of mattering through which mattering itself acquires meaning and form through the realization of different agential possibilities. Temporality and spatiality emerge in this processual historicity. Relations of exteriority, connectivity, and exclusion are reconfigured. The changing topologies of the world entail an ongoing reworking of the notion of dynamics itself. Dynamics are a matter not merely of properties changing in time, but of what matters in the ongoing materializing of different space-time topologies. The world is intraactivity in its differential mattering. I like that. Dynamics are not just merely like what we observe as change over time, but is actually time itself, space-time, because they can't be separated. Acting, creating, and mattering, differential mattering, refracting. In summary, the primal ontological units are not things, but phenomena. Okay, so in agential realist ontology, the primary units of being are not things, but phenomena. Dynamic, topological reconfigurings, entanglements, relationalities, rearticulations of the world. This cup is a phenomena, not a thing. Or me holding this cup in this video is a phenomena. Is phenomenal. And not, so the beingness doesn't lie in things itself. It lies actually in phenomena. To Karen. In what follows, I provide a detailed explication of this agential realist ontology. I begin with a detailed examination of the nature of the apparatus, including two significant analytical shifts that are important emendations to Bohr's formulation. 1. a shift from linguistic representations to discursive practices. And 2, a shift from apparatuses as static laboratory setups to an understanding of apparatuses as material discursive practices through which the very distinction between the social and the scientific, nature and culture is constituted. That's pretty cool. Yes, we should focus more on that. Oh my god, we're really caught up in representationalism. Okay, the nature of an apparatus, a quote by Ian Hacking. The opportunity to know the apparatus better, that is an integral part of knowing how to create phenomena. What is an apparatus? It is the set of instruments needed to perform an experiment. Oh, it's a question. Is it the set of instruments? Is it a mediating device that allows the object world to give us a sign of its nature? Is it a prosthetic extension of our sensing abilities? Shall we understand an apparatus in terms of Kantian grids of intelligibility, Aristotelian, like Aristotle, schemata, Heideggerian background, as Althusserian apparatuses, in Foucault's sense of discursive practices or dispositif, in Butler's sense of the performative, as Latour's inscription of translation devices, or as Haraway's apparatus of bodily production? There's all these different ways to understand what is an apparatus, and tons of philosophers have talked about what is an apparatus, what is a tool. And it's a big question for people, apparently. Okay, so Bohr's notion of an apparatus is unique among these theorizations, and yet there are some interesting reverberations among these possibilities worth exploring. Reverberating at different frequencies, these differing lines of thought can productively be read through one another for the patterns of resonance and dissonance that illuminate new possibilities for understanding and for being. Since apparatuses play such a crucial, indeed constitutive role, it is imperative that we understand their precise nature. In this chapter, I argue that apparatuses are not mere instruments or devices that can be deployed as neutral probes of the world or determining structures of a social nature, but neither are they merely laboratory instruments or social forces that function in a performative mode. Apparatuses are not merely about us, and they are not merely assemblages that include non-humans. Rather, apparatuses are specific material reconfigurations of the world that do not merely emerge in time, but iteratively reconfigure space-time matter as part of the ongoing dynamism of becoming. This is really interesting as it pertains to my study of cameras and image making and photography and moving images and things of the like, because cameras, moving images, screens, playback, all of those things are part of an apparatus. And she's saying that apparatuses are specific material reconfigurations of the world that do not merely emerge in time, but iteratively reconfigure space-time matter. Space-time matter is one word, as part of the ongoing dynamism of becoming. So I'm interested in how cameras mutate things, how they denature things, or how they iteratively reconfigure space-time matter as part of the ongoing dynamism of becoming. How cameras change how people behave and how objects behave, how things behave, and how the apparatuses that allow us to create moving images, and they're not merely about us, or what is it about them? I don't know. The next section is called the boundary of the apparatus, and it's kind of long, but I'm gonna go for it. This might be the last one. Let me take a sip. Bohr specifies certain specific criteria for apparatuses. According to Bohr, apparatuses are macroscopic material arrangements through which particular concepts are given definition. Very much like a hyperobject, Timothy Morton's hyperobject, which theorizes objects that are beyond our perception and in scale extremely large that capture or express themselves through smaller agents that we can perceive. So it's interesting that, according to Bohr, apparatuses are macroscopic material arrangements through which particular concepts are given definition. That is a hyperobject, to the exclusion of others, and through which particular phenomena with particular determinate physical properties are produced. Right? There are a lot of possibilities for what is possible, for what can happen, but certain things are more determined to happen based on the apparatuses in play. The far-reaching conclusion of Bohr's proto-performative analysis is that the apparatus plays a much more active and intimate role in experimental practices than classical physics recognizes. Apparatuses are not passive observing instruments. On the contrary, they are productive of and part of phenomena. Yet, despite the centrality of the apparatus to Bohr's analysis, he never fully articulates its nature. Questioning the basis of the Newtonian tradition, Bohr refuses to take for granted the delineation of the object and the agencies of observation, and makes the constitution of this inside boundary the centerpiece of his analysis. In particular, he emphasizes that the cut delineating the object from the agencies of observation is enacted rather than inherent. On the other hand, Bohr does not seem to help himself to the outside boundary of the apparatus. That is, while focusing on the lack of an inherent distinction between measuring instrument and measured object, Bohr does not directly address the question of where the apparatus ends, quote unquote. It's the outside boundary of the apparatus. Is the outside boundary of the apparatus coincident with the visual terminus of the instrumentation? What if an infrared interface, like a wireless connection, exists between the measuring instrument and a computer that collects the data? Does the apparatus include the computer? Is the printer attached to the computer part of the apparatus? Is the paper that is fed into the printer? Is the person who feeds the paper? How about the person who reads the marks on the paper? Or the scientists, technicians who design, build, and run the experiment? How about the community of scientists who judge the significance of the experiment and indicate their support of or lack of support for future funding? What precisely constitutes the limits of the apparatus that gives meaning to certain concepts at the exclusion of others? Where does one thing end and begin? One of the questions, perhaps the question that Bohr finds most pressing in his investigation of measurement practices is how it is possible to secure the conditions for the possibility of objectivity, given that subjective elements such as human concepts play a How is it possible to secure the conditions for the possibility of objectivity, given that subjective elements, such as human concepts, play a productive, though not determining, role in the outcome of measurements? In other words, what is at stake for him in the challenge posed by quantum physics is nothing less than how we can account for the fact that science works. Crucial to Bohr's analysis of the subject-object distinction is his insistence that concepts are materially embodied in the apparatus. In particular, Bohr insists that only concepts defined by their scientific embodiment as part of the material arrangement, which includes instrumentation, photographic plates, pointers, digital readout devices, that marks definite values of the specifically defined properties and can be read by a human observer are meaningful. Bohr insists that only concepts defined by their specific embodiment as part of a material arrangement that marks definite values of specifically defined properties and can be read by a human observer are meaningful. That is, the larger material arrangement enacts a cut that resolves the inherent ontic semantic indeterminacy through which the subject and object emerge. Apparatuses are the conditions of possibility for determinate boundaries and properties of objects and meanings of embodied concepts within the phenomenon. Indeed, this embodiment of concepts as part of the apparatus is ultimately what secures the possibility of objective knowledge as defined in terms of Bohr's epistemic criteria of reproducibility and communicability. Okay, so that is like if a concept is defined and has definite values and properties that can be read by a human observer, it becomes meaningful. And that is basically that the larger material arrangement enacts a cut that resolves inherent word being indeterminacy through which the subject and the object emerge. Kind of like I was saying at the beginning, like a sentence is structured in a way that determines meaning, makes things meaningful, like grammar, but that grammar isn't necessarily inherently true of the world. Apparatuses are the conditions of possibility for determinate boundaries and properties of objects and meanings of embodied concepts with the phenomenon. Indeed, the embodiment of concepts, blah, blah, blah. One pronounced limitation of Bohr's account, then, is that the human is thereby cemented into the very foundations of the quantum theory and the far-reaching philosophical implications of his proto-performative account of scientific practices. Observation and communication, the contingencies of visibility and invisibility, the concepts of concepts and utterances are crucial to this formulation. Man isn't merely the measure of all things. Man's finitude is implicated in the very conditions of possibility, of measurability, and determinability. It is as if, in the desire to compensate for the shortcomings of classical mechanics, which erroneously jettisons the observer from the scene of the observation, Bohr overshoots his mark and places the human not merely back in the picture where they belong, but at the center of it all. Furthermore, Bohr's concept of the apparatus does not accurately take account of the complexities of experimental practice, despite his apparent intention to do just that. Quite atypical of the writings of theoretical physicists, Bohr's papers include detailed drawings of measuring instruments. His attentiveness to the details of the apparatus make perfect sense given his insistence that the concepts used to describe phenomena are not ideations, but specific material arrangements. For Bohr, word and world are tied to each other. Nonetheless, Bohr treats the apparatus as an ideal measuring device that springs full-blown from the head of Zeus, operates itself, or at most requires the pushing of a few buttons to produce results, requires no tinkering, no maintenance, no muss or fuss. Its constitutionality remains constant, so no rearrangements, no alterations, no adjustments. It is frozen at a moment in time, denied its historicity and mutability. In an important sense, then, Bohr's apparatus is hermetically sealed off from any and all outside influences, saying that tools are calibrated, are changed, they are mutable, and that Bohr's picture of them kind of freezes them in a time. The scientist is a liberal humanist subject who is merely there to choose an appropriate apparatus for the investigation and note the results. Once the apparatus is in place, the scientist stands back and watches what happens. In short, Bohr mistakes the apparatus for a mere laboratory setup. Magically, the scientific instrumentation works correctly without intervention, reducing the role of the experimenter to a mere recorder of the objective marks displayed by the instrument or the instrumentation. For all of Bohr's insistence on thinking realistically about apparatuses, refusing to contemplate them as idealized forms, he artificially cuts the apparatus off from all the activities that enable experimental practice to work. As Hacking notes, most experiments don't work most of the time. To ignore this fact is to forget what experimentation is doing. To experiment is to create, produce, refine, and stabilize phenomena. But phenomena are hard to produce in any stable way. That is why I spoke of creating and not merely discovering phenomena. That is a long, hard task. Or rather, there are endless different tasks. There is designing an experiment that might work. There is learning how to make the experiment work. But perhaps the real knack is getting to know when the experiment is working. That is one reason why observation, in the philosophy of science usage of the term, plays a relatively small role in experimental science. Noting and reporting readings of dials, Oxford's philosophy picture of experiment, is nothing. Another kind of observation is what counts. The uncanny ability to pick out what is odd, wrong, instructive, or distorted in the antics of one's equipment. The experiment is not the observer of traditional philosophy. The experimenter is not the observer of traditional philosophy of science, but rather the alert, observant person. Only when one has got the equipment running right is one in a position to make and record observations. That is a picnic. Bohr's configuration of the apparatus makes it inoperable in practice. The liberal humanist conception of the subject and the taken for granted static and bounded apparatus that are embodied in Bohr's theoretical apparatus get in the way of his efforts to provide a deeper understanding of the nature of scientific practices and ultimately cut short the profound ontological implications of his ideas. In taking for granted an intrinsic outside boundary of the apparatus, which incorporates human concepts within its bounds while ejecting the observer to the outside, Bohr reifies the self-same subjective elements he sets out to tame, ignoring the dynamism of discursive practices and the co-constitution of subjects along with objects. Bohr seems to have forgotten his own lesson that cuts are part of the phenomena they help produce. What is needed is a post-humanist understanding of the role of the apparatus and of the human and the relationship between them. Okay, I feel like go on, right? Toward an agential realist understanding of apparatus. One task that stands before us is to further elaborate Bohr's immensely important insights while removing the less savory anthropocentric elements, including his dependence on the notion of human concepts in laboratory setups. As we have seen, it is also important to take into account the dynamic and complex nature of scientific practices. In recent years, critical social theorists have offered sophisticated accounts of the practices by which meanings, boundaries, and bodies are produced. The problem is that these accounts are invested and enmeshed in a host of anthropocentric assumptions as well. For example, Judith Butler's performative account of mattering thinks the matter of materiality and signification together in their indissolubility. However, basically, Judith's account of performative mattering thinks matter, material, and signification together are insoluble, that they're always bound. However, Butler's concern is limited to the production of human bodies, and only certain aspects of their production at that. And her theorization of materialization is parasitic on Foucault's notion of regulatory power and discursive practices, which are limited to the domain of human social practices. Furthermore, for both Butler and Foucault, agency belongs only to the human domain, and neither addresses the nature of technoscientific practices and their profoundly productive effects on human bodies, as well as the ways in which these practices are deeply implicated in what constitutes the human and more generally, the workings of power. That is, both accounts honor the nature-culture binary to different degrees, thereby deferring the thoroughgoing genealogy of its production. Crucially, Butler and Foucault's theories fail to provide an adequate account of the relationship between discursive practices and material phenomena, leading one to wonder if Bohr's insights into the embedded nature of concepts might fruitfully intervene in that regard. What is needed is a post-humanist performative account of the material discursive practices of mattering, including those that get labeled scientific and those that get labeled social. In what follows, I diffractively read the insights of Bohr, Foucault, Butler, and other important theorists through one another in an effort to advance such an account. This will entail important reworkings of the notions of materiality, discursive practices, agency, and causality, among others. My agential realist elaboration of apparatuses entails the following significant developments beyond Bohr's formulation. 1. Apparatuses are specific material discursive practices. They are not merely laboratory setups that embody human concepts and take measurements. They are specific material discursive practices. And 2, apparatuses produce differences that matter. They are boundary-making practices that are formative of matter and meaning, productive of and part of the phenomena produced. 3, apparatuses are material configurations, dynamic reconfigurings of the world. 4, apparatuses are themselves phenomena, constituted and dynamically reconstituted as part of the ongoing intra-activity of the world. 5, apparatuses have no intrinsic boundaries, but are open-ended practices. And 6, apparatuses are not located in the world, but are material configurations or reconfigurations of the world that refigure or reconfigure spatiality and temporality, as well as the traditional notion of dynamics. For example, they do not exist as static structures, nor do they merely unfold or evolve in space and time. They are space-time incarnate. We are space-time incarnate. Apparatuses are material discursive practices. They produce differences that matter. They're boundary-making practices that are formative of matter and meaning and productive of and part of phenomena produced. Like the apparatus could be part of a phenomena and make it and be made from at the same time. Apparatuses are material configurations, dynamic reconfigurings of the world. Okay, wow, okay, loving it, okay. Oh my god, how much more in this chapter? There's quite some more. I feel like we'll stop here. And I might read more from this later because it's pretty good. Alright, thanks for watching, you guys. I hope this was interesting to you. It definitely was interesting to me. It makes me less depressed to focus on thoughts like this for some reason, because I feel like there's something to it that is spiritually meaningful to me. So that's cool. Thanks for watching, let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys next time.